Okay, we'll call the meeting to order, please. Tonight is a special meeting to deal with the Metro Vancouver's Regional Growth Strategy. It is in the form of a public hearing, but isn't a true public hearing. It's more a public information meeting. So, good evening, and on behalf of all of Council, I would like to welcome you and thank you for coming on this cold and windy night to share your thoughts with us. We've called this meeting to provide residents with an opportunity to share your ideas and comments on issues affecting the city in regards to the Metro Vancouver Regional Growth Strategy, which is a huge document, and within this document definitely will challenge and change the ways all cities do business. I would like to start by introducing my council members, but I don't have to because we're all in our proper seats, except I am not Mayor Stewart, I am May Reid. And Mayor Stewart has put his back out, and unfortunately he will be joining us later or not at all this evening, but he will be watching it on the webcam. He assures me if he cannot make it. We have a number of key staff members in attendance. Peter Steblin, our City Manager, Jim McIntyre, General Manager, Planning and Development, Dan McDonald, Manager, Corporate Communications. And for your reference, this meeting is being broadcast on the web and can be viewed later on the website. In a short time, the floor will be open to anyone who wishes to present your views on issues related to the Metro Vancouver Regional Growth Strategy. I will need each speaker's name and address for the record. Please remember that council members and staff are here with an open mind and are here to listen to your input. That being said, when making your presentation to Council, I ask that you be as brief and concise as possible. We are asking speakers to respect a 5-minute time limit in order that everyone who wishes to speak is able to do so. You are able to speak more than once, but we ask you to let those who haven't spoken first to go before you speak for a second time. Please be respectful in your submission to each other and to us, and don't make personal comments. Where appropriate, City staff may be asked by Council to respond to presenters regarding their specific inquiry, whether that be immediately after the meeting has concluded or in the days to come, dependent upon the complexity of the question. Refrain from clapping, cheering, or booing. It works great at sports games, but not so much in here. As chair of this meeting, I reserve the right to conclude any presentation that becomes abusive, becomes repetitive of views that the speaker has already made known to us, and I will now open the floor to fellow residents and ask that anyone wishing to address Council to proceed to the microphone at the front of the room, and there will be no dialogue between Council members. There's not going to be a debate here tonight. There's not going to be political references. We will be doing our political debate on this issue on March 21st at the open meeting, the regular Council open meeting. This tonight is to hear from you and your concerns. So, anyone want to go first? Maggie Moss, welcome.
And I promise tonight I'll be on my very best behavior.
You always are. And your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Maggie Moss, and I live at 1550 Tanglewood Lane, Coquitlam, up in Westwood Plateau. And I'm not a very good public speaker, so I've made a few notes here. There are some of us who have been watching the Regional Growth Strategy very closely over the past few years and have participated in public hearings and have submitted written comments. Many municipalities have had citizens who have also spoken about the loss of important assets in their communities. In Richmond, Delta and Maple Ridge, we hear about concerns regarding loss of agricultural land. Other communities like West Vancouver have had concerns about special study areas and loss of mountain slopes to development. Port Moody is challenged by communities to the east that are growing their populations rapidly without any transportation infrastructure in place. In Coquitlam, most voices of concern come from the redesignation of our green spaces, including the Westwood Golf and Country Club, all neighbourhood parks under 25 acres, and riparian areas which were slated to be changed to a general urban designation when the people of Coquitlam wish for them to be designated conservation recreation. In my mind, there are two very important aspects to the RGS. Firstly, that it will be in effect until the year 2040, almost 30 years. Secondly, by the year 2040, Coquitlam's population will have grown to 240,000 people. This means that there will be almost 100,000 more people in this community. With this in mind, we absolutely have to protect our neighbourhood parks, environmentally sensitive and riparian areas to the fullest possible protection. We don't know what future councils will do with these green spaces, and it is imperative that we protect them in this document. As city budgets become more and more stretched, we may see more pressures to commercialise these parks, and my belief is that we have to give them a fighting chance by allowing a regional designation that will allow a 2/3, 1/3 vote at Metro Vancouver and a regional public hearing. I guess nothing is forever, but we have an opportunity now to do the best that we can for future generations. I believe the Westwood Golf and Country Club brings its own challenges to this city. Rumours abound about the financial viability of the course today. So perhaps if we were to project to another 30 years, I'm sure that there are those who believe that conservation recreation is an unreasonable restriction and might be untenable in the future. However, it is Council's job to listen to the voice of the people who overwhelmingly demanded the conservation recreation designation. Coquitlam staff and Council went against their wishes and requested a general urban designation. The matter has now been made even worse by a recommendation by the Technical Advisory Committee of Metro Vancouver, chaired by Jim McIntyre, which very recently added a clause on page 60 of the RGS document which would exclude the golf course from the full protection of the Conservation Recreation designation. If Councillor Sikora's recent motion regarding returning the golf course back to conservation recreation would have passed a few weeks ago, none of us would have known that this clause existed, and we would have been given a full sense of security. We all owe Helen Brown a very big thank you for reading the entire document and very carefully and uncovering this clause. Now, I understand that Metro Vancouver has given us two options, and a decision has to be made by March 22nd of this year. Firstly, to accept the RGS and to request that certain amendments be made. Most importantly, to return the parks and riparian areas and the Westwood Golf and Country Club back to conservation recreation. We also have to make sure that the clause 6.3.3 on page 60 of the RGS bylaw excludes the Westwood Golf Course to give it full protection again. The second option is not to accept the RGS. If this happens, as it did in Port Moody, then Coquitlam will have to state its objections and the whole process will slow up while an arbitrator from the provincial government looks at these concerns. This I find somewhat ironic because, after all, it was Coquitlam who requested all these changes in the first place. I imagine that it will be very embarrassing for Coquitlam to now go back to Metro Vancouver to say that they don't like the RGS because of clauses that they requested in the first place. However, I believe these changes do not affect other municipalities, and so I'm hopeful that Metro Vancouver may comply without affecting the whole RGS process. I do hope this can be done. All we are asking is to protect the Westwood Golf and Country Club and our valuable neighbourhood parks and riparian areas for future generations to come. After all, we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children.
Thank you. Maggie, if you could just hold on for a moment. Councillor Sikora has a question for you.
Not really a question, just that the parks, we've asked the manager to come up by end of March so that all the parks can be protected in the special zone they've asked to put through. Also, the boat, the notice of motion that I have, Metro Vancouver, is where it said that they will accept that amendment to the category that I want to put through the notice of motion. It's okay with Metro Vancouver.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Sikora.
Okay, but your notice of motion was just for the golf course, wasn't it?
Just the golf course, yeah.
We will be dealing with this on March 21st. Thank you very much. Next speaker, please. Mr. Tom Cox. Name and address for the record.
Tom Cox, 1465 Parkway Boulevard.
Thank you.
I am speaking on behalf of the Westwood Plateau Community Association. You will probably be glad when the regional growth strategy is behind us and you don't have us bothering you. As we have been requesting for over a year now, we want to see the lands of the Westwood Plateau Golf Course and all the green lands in Coquitlam recognized in the regional growth strategy as conservation recreation and not the current general urban that was requested by Coquitlam. While Council has not yet voted on whether or not to accept the regional growth strategy, and while any acceptance apparently cannot be conditional, we would like your letter to Metro Vancouver to include the request that following approval, the designation of these lands be changed from general urban to conservation recreation. As other municipalities have made similar requests, we assume this will be done in a one-time vote at Metro after approval. As this is a 30-year plan, it is important that Coquitlam have and protect as much green space as possible to accommodate future growth. Protect the wildlife and streams. Let us continue to breathe fresh air and be proud of the city where we live. We appreciate, while the current council has stated it has no intention of developing these lands, you have been patient with us during these past year and our concerns about future councils, although probably frequently annoyed with us. We ask that you give residents the peace of mind to rest easy and do this by giving as much protection as possible to these lands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cox. Next speaker, please. Your name and address for the record, please.
Oscar Sanchez, residence of 3321 Plateau Boulevard.
Thank you.
All right. First of all, there remains considerable vagueness regarding the desired growth outlook for the areas designated as general urban, but which are not urban centers or frequent transit development areas. The Regional Growth Strategy Plan says that Metro Vancouver should accept regional context statements that prioritize growth and focus higher density development primarily in urban centers. Meanwhile, the municipality is to ensure that general urban development outside of these urban centers is of a generally lower density. As such, there is little information regarding what sort of infill growth Metro Vancouver wishes to see outside of these urban centers. Municipalities are being asked to encourage infill development by directing growth to established areas. But what exactly are the terms of these established areas? Could a small municipal park caught in the general urban land use designation be included in this category of established areas and thus be open to development? Furthermore, the Regional Growth Strategy Plan also asks municipalities to exclude non-residential trip-generating uses within the general urban areas outside of the urban centers. Here again, the vagueness of the statement is an issue. What is to be considered in this category? Major parks, the golf courses, and schools attract substantial numbers of people, and these are non-residential uses. Are these to be excluded from the general urban areas in question? Another issue concerns the process for Type 3 minor amendments in the Regional Growth Strategy Plan, particularly with regards to the conservation, recreation, and general urban land use designations. As stated in the RGSP, the change of conservation, recreation, lands utilized only for commercially extensive recreation facilities to any other regional land use designation falls under the category of a Type 3 amendment. To change this requires only a simple majority weight vote and no regional public hearing. As such, it is possible that a conservation recreation area could undergo a land use change without the public's consent or even their knowledge. According to the Regional Growth Strategy Plan, the Westwood Plateau Golf and Country Club would be classifiable as a recreation conservation area, as it falls under the category of recreation, primarily outdoor, Section 3.1.4b3, and commercial uses, tourism, Section 3.1.4b5. However, under the Regional Growth Strategy Plan, it seems that despite this designation, the Westwood Plateau Golf and Country Club since it falls under a Type 3 amendment, could be changed to a general urban land use designation without a public hearing. Perhaps the most glaring issue with the Regional Growth Strategy Plan regards the separation of powers between Metro Vancouver and the municipalities. It is not clear as to who retains control over the changing of land use designations. It is unclear as to whether the GVRD and its Regional Growth Strategy Plan acts as a body of approval or as an executive one. Is the city the only one that can change recreational conservation areas to general urban, a process which would require the city to conduct a public hearing with the GVRD subsequently approving this decision through a Type 3 amendment to the Regional Growth Strategy Plan? Or can the GVRD change land use designations without the consent of the city and without the consent of its citizens, simply through the Type 3 amendment? Overall, it is not clear what, if any, protection the RGSP and the municipalities are providing to recreation conservation areas through the use of their regional context statements. It appears that these areas are being given protection. However, there seems to be a large number of exceptions and loopholes that could potentially threaten the conservation and recreation areas. Thank you.
Thank you. I must compliment you on your very thorough presentation. I think we're all pretty impressed up here. This document is like walking through a minefield, and I think you've hit about 4 mines on your way through. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I know that staff has been listening very carefully. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, please. There's nobody that wants to talk to us? Aha. Mr. Trumley.
Councillor Reid.
Your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Jack Trumley. I'm at 2314 Sumter Road in Coquitlam. I'm not going to repeat, I think quite eloquently, they said it quite well in terms of what was important to them. Strategy 3.1 under protection and conservation of recreational lands, including land use policies that the municipality can do to support the protection and conservation of recreation areas. That's pretty much all done. I think one of the things that came up last summer, and I think it's important how passionate people feel about their parks, was what happened at Mundy Park in the summertime, and the fact that we tried to create a zip line in there, and we all know how passionate people feel about their green spaces. And it was very clear to council what we would and shouldn't be doing in there is creating any commercial things going on in there. That's something I think you need to remember that accordingly, because I think what's important here, when you look at surveys and some of the facts out there, people really care about their parks, and it's time and time again that people care about that. The issue is coming around that we really want to make sure that the spaces that we have available will stay there, and the green spaces will stay there, and it's important that council consider that it's very important for how we live in our communities. One of the stats that have come on I've read recently was people, if you ask somebody where they wanted to live, whether it be a desirable house or a desirable community, they wanted to really, almost 100% want to live in a desirable community. You also ask the same people what location, if you had to stand somewhere and be somewhere, where would you like to be? And they almost universally said they'd like to be either near the ocean or in trees, in a green space. So it's something that's extremely important to people moving forward in Coquitlam, and as I say, once you remove it, it's gone, it's gone. I think it's important, aside from all this, there is a lot of minefields in here, but there's also a lot of good document. I've read it here, and there's a lot of things that Coquitlam can look at and take pieces up. We can't do it all, there's no question. There's a lot of things here. One of the things we can do is look at our conservation recreational areas, and I really appreciate what Councillor Sikora said a few months ago. Why don't we just take our parks and protect them? It can be easily done. Let's do it. Let's look at what we can do here. It's important. I know we all talk about wowing the citizens of the Lower Mainland about what Coquitlam's all about. But I think what's important here as well, why don't we wow the citizens that live here? And I think that's really a key component, because the people who live, it's the people who pay their taxes here need to be wowed. So when somebody walks into a community and says, I like the way this community is laid out, I like the green spaces, that's the wow factor that people hit. It's the people who walk into these communities every day. So I think it's important to step back, look at the green spaces, recognize what people have to say here, look at the previous history of what's happened in terms of how people care about our parks for uses all the time, and particularly passive use. I think that's important because not all of us are involved in recreational sports. Some people just like to go for a walk and enjoy the park, and that's very important. Apparently there's a study out there, people who go for walks, and I'm sure you've all done it, the stress factor becomes quite relaxed in a place where you have a forest setting, and that's important. It's no value there in terms of dollars, but there's certainly value there to the community and the people who are around there, and just ask the people in Mundy Park. I think that's a key one. So let's continue to do this. Let's continue to have good communities, well-developed, lots of green spaces. We have some issues around our green spaces moving up Burke Mountain, and we need to spend a lot more time and make sure we hold the feet to the fire of the developers up there to make sure that they're not just building houses, but they are building communities. And I think that's really important, because at the end of the day, you have to live there, and we still have to pay for it in terms of our property taxes. The urban sprawl, i.e. single-family homes, is going to cost a lot more money as it continues on, and it's all these people here that are going to have to pay for it at the end. So keep in mind multi-density, compact areas, and making sure we have our green spaces. Thank you.
Thank you for your thoughtful comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, please. Somebody's got to want to talk to us. Oh.
Nobody else.
I know, you're it.
Sorry.
You're it.
I got one more point, and as a cyclist, I think we're now reading this report. We are a designated urban center, and I think we could probably do a lot more to provide improved cycling routes around the area. I think that's one of the ways we want to get around. And I was at an open house with a company called Rhino Marketing, who actually put washroom facilities and shower facilities in their businesses so they could attract people, employees, that they can ride their bike and be quite diverse that way. So bicycle lanes are good for business, because it allows people to attract those employees that want to do those kinds of things and have a longer commitment in terms of how they want to stay with that company. So I think cycling lanes we could do better on, particularly while we're being recognized in this report as one of the major urban centers in the metropolitan Vancouver area. I think that's critical, and I think bicycle lanes should be something to be a bigger thing in terms of what council can take on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other speakers, please? Ms. Brown.
Well, I've been scribbling here.
Name and address.
Helen Brown, 2855 Walton Avenue, Coquitlam. Of course, I've spoken to you folks before. I've spoken to the public hearing that Metro provided here in Coquitlam, and really, my views have not changed in terms of how I value green spaces and everything. But I just can't wrap my head around the decision that this city made, basically unilaterally. In other words, the public was not involved in the decision to ask Metro to put our parks under 25 acres, the golf course, Westwood Golf Course lands, the riparian areas, and numerous other environmentally sensitive areas into general urban and not conservation recreation. Now, maybe if you had consulted with the public, you would have found right off the bat that, hey, that was not really a very acceptable notion. And we would not be here tonight trying to, at the last minute, the proverbial 11th hour, trying to kind of turn things around and figure out a way that maybe we can retrace some of those steps and change our appeal that was made originally to Metro and in fact say, hey, there was a mistake made. You know, we didn't realize how much our public cared about these these spaces. And another thing about that document that was sent by our city to Metro at that time, and that's like almost 2 years ago, was that this 25-acre cutoff thing. Now, I think that there's not a person in this room who doesn't understand that you can have a 30-acre park that is all artificial turf and no trees, and understand that that kind of a park, even though it's over 25 acres, is not really what you'd call an excellent carbon sink. But you could take a park like Glen Park, which is 16 acres, and obviously falls under the 25-acre mark, and it is a carbon sink. The south end of it, the forest that's at the south end, albeit it's smaller now than it was because Lincoln Avenue has gone through, but I should say was put through, that is considered by the Parks Department to be a wildlife habitat, and it will only have a little trail in it under the new parks plan. The forest at the north end is a little bit rowdier and everything, and that there's going to be a little more use made to that, and it has natural grass between those two forests. That 16-acre park is a carbon sink. And I believe that that kind of a park, whether it's 5 acres, 10 acres, whatever, is of value to the whole region. This is regionally significant because Lord knows we are losing our carbon sinks. We are losing them by actions, and it's happening in every town, every city within the 22 municipalities of Metro, is that small houses with big yards are being torn down and great big houses are put in their place. The little tiny yard that's left there is now being used for laneway houses or something. And so yards that used to have trees in them, and many of them were native trees that were left over from the second growth of Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. They had native trees, they had other trees, fruit trees and so on. People grew their own fruit and vegetables in their yards if they were situated in a way that they could get the 6 hours of sun that they need for that in a day. Well, that's not happening. That is disappearing. And we're talking about, internationally, we're talking about shortages of food, inabilities for countries and cities and individuals to grow food. Well, this is how it all happens. You just keep putting those bigger houses, you keep taking up all those spaces, and I'm not blaming you folks about, I know it's happening all over, but it is bad judgment. And we really then have to look at the things that we own that are publicly owned and say, okay, these are spaces we can protect because they are owned by the public. And let's not forget, it's the public. We're the people who are paying for all of this stuff. We're paying for the maintenance, we're paying for the ownership, we're paying for your salaries, we're paying for staff salaries, we pay for the maintenance of this building, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have a huge stake in this, and our voices really deserve to be heard to a huge extent, not just as a sort of little burr under somebody's saddle blanket, to coin an old Western phrase. Now, I just have one short point I'd like to make, and that is that I agree with what's been suggested by previous speakers as to what should be changed about this RGS. And I definitely think that under page 60, under type 3 minor amendments to the regional growth strategy, that the new phrase, conservation and recreation lands utilized only for commercial extensive recreation facilities, should be taken out of that clause. Absolutely taken out of that, because that was put in there specifically to deal with golf course lands. Not just our golf course, but golf courses all over the region. And I would really like to see that removed. I think that it was an error in judgment to put it in there in the first place. So, anybody else lined up behind me? Here we go.
There's no great thundering to the microphone.
Pardon?
No great thundering crowds to the microphone. Did you want another 5?
Well, maybe people take a little while to warm up. A lot of people here have never been here before.
I'm going to give you another few minutes. I have to figure out this silly machine. And it's green. It's a good sign.
And the other comment I'd like to make is based on the comment that Jack made, and I know he made it with all good intention, but he said that, that the park might not have a lot of dollar value. But in fact, they do have dollar values. The dollar value of our green spaces was clearly established recently, or reported recently, in the Vancouver Sun by the Suzuki Foundation. They attached significant dollar values to all of our green spaces. And I won't go into all of the litany of all the ways that value multiplies, but there it is. They do have value. Just if all you're only thinking about is dollars and cents, they do have value. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any other speakers? Aha. Someone I recognize?
I'm going to take a slightly different...
Name and address for the record.
Okay, Maxine Wilson, number 37, 2979 Panorama Drive.
Welcome.
And I'm going to be the historian tonight because I first became aware of the plans for parks in Coquitlam when, oh dear, it's gone blank, Eagle Ridge was being developed. And the families there were so concerned because there was no parkland. Then later, and I noticed you're having some concerns about maintaining school board playing fields right now. Later, when I was more involved in the school district and then on school board, I learned that Coquitlam was unique in this region in the requirement for 10% of developed lands to be parklands. They counted school playing fields as part of the 10%. Cities like Burnaby, New Westminster, the cities themselves have 10% parkland, as well as the school sites. So I feel as community, the history here has been shortchanging the residents of our community with park space. And the well-educated workers we need to attract to our city value green space. They value knowledge and they value arts and culture. And they can choose where they want to live, and they'll establish jobs when they choose that place. So I think it's really important that there be a complete modification in how this council reacts to the value of parkland. And the second thing is, I think there's confusion around the relationship as the city negotiated a development agreement for the development of the Westwood Plateau. And because I was on school board at that time, there started to be revisions. The first major revision was there was to be a major park, public park, on the Westwood Plateau. And the developer came to the city and requested to put in a public golf course, which all the residents of Coquitlam could use, instead of the major park. So that change was made. I tell you right now, there have been other changes to that development agreement by a majority vote of council. It can happen again with that green space. So it needs to be protected. The third thing that concerns me is, having had the history of what relationships were like at GVRD, now Metro, with Coquitlam when I first went there, and to try to start building collegial cooperative relationships took a lot of work. And what I hear this council saying right now about Metro, which is purely a collective of all the councils that agree to work out by consensus how the whole region should be developed, because what Burnaby does, what Abbotsford does, what Surrey does, all affect our quality of life. And once you've done something that destroys quality of life, it's going to be very hard to change it. I also think that Coquitlam needs the cooperation like they never have before from the other municipalities in this region, because we want them to support Evergreen Line. It is long overdue that we get that. So I do not want to hear this lack of cooperation and distrust of your fellow they're all elected, but appointed. All the directors are elected. They're appointed by their councils to sit on Metro Vancouver's board. And there's never been a time where Coquitlam has to work with the other councils, because we're growing and we need their support of what our goals are. I hope that you face reality, realize we've got to value parks and create more park space, not put green space in danger in this city. We've also got to support and work with the regional district so that we can have a quality community for our children and grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please. No.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. You have a question for staff?
Yes. No, for Maxine Wilson.
A question?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Maxine. Lou Sikora has a question for you.
Thank you for your comments. Where'd you get the idea that there was going to be a major park instead of the golf course put in there?
All right, when it came to school board, because we had to read and make comments every time there was an adjustment to the development agreement that had been negotiated. Originally, and that was when I was early on the school board, it had been designated parkland, and we as a school board had to take time and give our comments on changing that to a public golf course. Yeah, that's my recollection. I remember it well.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm not going to argue with you, but that's wrong.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. Is there any other speakers? Aha. Oh, now I'm getting a couple. Goody. Name and address for the record, please.
Tania Sanchez from 3321 Plateau Boulevard. It is it's mostly a question. It is my understanding that the Westwood Plateau Golf and Country Club, at present, his land use designation is still recreation and conservation. While if the RGSP passes, the golf course land use will be overlaid with a general urban land use designation. Even though it will not be a general urban land designation per se, these lands will stand in limbo, right, between being or not being general urban or being conservation and recreation, as previously was discussed in, here. In one of the arguments, we saw the general urban or conservation recreation land use designation inside or outside the regional context statement will not protect these lands. So I would like to know what is the City Council prepared to do after the RGSP is passed, and if the regional context statement is not good enough to protect the lands, what are you prepared to do to protect these lands? If we see that there is a lot of loopholes and a lot of things that are not clear in this regional plan.
The lands are protected, but perhaps would you care to answer this now or later on for Ms. Sanchez? Mr. McIntyre.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I can try to answer that now with the questions fresh in mind. A number of comments. The existing regional plan is the Livable Region Strategic Plan, the LRSP. And in the LRSP, a portion, much but not all, of the Westwood Plateau golf course lands are in the green zone. They are also now within the city's official community plan designated for extensive recreation. So it's a green community plan designation. It's also zoned for golf course use. So there's sort of three layers. There's the LRSP, the OCP, and the zoning. In the change from the LRSP to the Regional Growth Strategy, the RGS, the green zone has been sort of split into different areas. There's rural, agricultural, and conservation recreation. What has been proposed is that those golf course lands remain within the general urban designation, which is kind of a catch-all. It's got all kinds of different land uses in there, but it would still remain in the official community plan as extensive recreation and zone for golf course.
Okay, so what the council will do to protect these lands, and further, you guys will discuss later? Or? On Monday, I understand now what he's saying, how it's the lands who are designated, but it's still
Yeah, I know it's as clear as mud. Yes, I understand. And it gets clearer. The more deep you get into the mud, the clearer we try and make it become. All of us have heard you, and all of us have heard your comments. And just because you're not hearing anything from us at this very moment doesn't mean that we're not all working individually on our own, together, or with staff on what the outcome is going to be before the March deadline. And you will hear all our answers on March 21st, and each of us will be able to say what we feel, how we've done, how we would change it. Burnaby in the first iteration, and I've had emails from you, I know, had 26 pages of changes. We've had changes. Every city's had changes. And the unfortunate thing is every time one city wants to change one thing, we have to be careful that it doesn't change that same thing in 22 other cities. So it becomes, there was no consistency to begin with, and as the water gets muddied more, it gets more complicated. But we have heard you, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Hopefully on Monday, or pardon me, March 21st, it will be clarified for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other speakers? No other speakers before I allow a secondary speaker? Oh, there's a couple of people. Maggie, if we could let them go up first, and then, thank you. So come forward, please.
My name is Maya Burlston. I live at 3222 Norwood Court in Coquitlam, which is on the top of Westwood Plateau. And a few years ago, one of the hemlock trees on our property died. And we knew we could not just cut a tree, we had to get a permit. So we went to the city, and it was a menace. We wrote a number of letters, and finally we got a permission to cut this dead tree that posed the danger that it could fall onto the house. And when the tree was cut, we were ordered to plant 2 trees to replace the dead tree. So this is just the example. When we talk about sort of small issues, it's sort of very, very difficult to resolve the issue. And here we have council that made sort of the decision, change the designation from recreation into sort of general urban, which could allow cutting the whole sort of Westwood Plateau and parks and everything without even sort of consulting the people. Yeah. So I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think it's far-fetched that one of the big developers is eyeing, especially Westwood Plateau Golf Course and the parks around the sort of city. And it seems that the way sort of via program, it's that there is no balanced approach to development. Big developer sort of gets the permit to do massive development. And nobody even looks if there is a demand really for such a development. Like we bought, when we moved from Toronto a number of years ago, we bought into new development. They could not even sell the houses. They were busing people from other countries to buy into development. And the other point is nobody even looks if there are adequate services. There are no adequate sort of medical services, fire services from all those developments. So my point is that I think first and the most important is to protect what is left, because that is the quality of living that we all enjoy. And second, if it comes to some looking to future development, that more integrated approach is taken rather than just giving the permit to the developer and then struggle who is going to buy the places. And no services, so I'm calling for more integrated approach to any future development, and at this stage to return the golf course and other lands into sort of protective category. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Jerome Gignac from 2238 Parkway Boulevard. And I wanted to ask a question first, but I wanted to first point out that I couldn't agree with the gentleman that spoke earlier more. We are one of those families that moved from back east, and when we came to Coquitlam, after looking at several communities in the area, Tsawwassen and North Van, and several others. We looked at about 50 houses in 1 week. It wasn't until we got to Coquitlam and we saw the house that we're currently in that overlooks the Westwood Plateau Golf Course that we knew right away. We fell in love with that house, and wasn't so much the house as it was the surrounding area when we saw the hiking trails and all the green space and the fact that our backyard overlooks Eagle Mountain, and just that was the deciding factor for us the moment we saw that house. I've spoken to Mayor Stewart when this first came up about, I guess it might be a bit of a naive question, but at some point, Westwood Plateau Golf and Country Club was designated as conservation recreation. So somebody saw that area as unique to the other golf courses in the area. I know that what the mayor had told me was that the intention of this is to try to simplify this to designate all the golf courses and parklands in one catch-all category as general urban. He said some are designated right now as agricultural and some are designated as recreation and general use already. But at some point, somebody saw Westwood Plateau and said, no, this is unique. This is a conservation recreation area. So my question to the mayor was, if there's absolutely no plans whatsoever at any time of developing these lands, then why don't we just leave it as conservation recreation? Why do we need to change it?
Okay, well, as we're not answering, you're going to get the answer from each of us on March 21st, but Mr. McIntyre. Well, it's either we go into a big political debate or we just, right now you're still where you were in the land LRSP, and
I'm a resident up there too, and I've been a resident up there for over 15 years, so I know what you speak. Regardless of the regional plan, and as I said before, in the LRSP, which is still in effect till it's replaced by the RGS, when, a portion of the golf course lands were in the green zone, and a portion was the urban growth area. It's true that in earlier versions, drafts of the RGS, it was following those green zones. As I explained before, the green zone was split into conservation, recreation, and rural and agricultural. So, the concern was, I guess, with the general thrust of the RGS. It's a more controlling document. It's more detailed, and so I think the city had some hesitation around that. And just the same way now and after, when the RGS is adopted, it would still be protected under our official community plan with that extensive recreation designation. It would still have the zoning, and there is a restrictive covenant on the lands, call for a golf course. So in any scenario, there would still be those regulations, those policies, land use policies in place to make it clear that those lands are intended for golf course use and green space. Anyone wanting to change that would need to then go through that sequence of applying to the city to amend the OCP and zoning, and they'd have to apply, through the city to Metro Vancouver to change either the LRSP or the RGS. So there's still the same sort of hoops you have to go through, and there's still the same controls at the city level.
Then my question to that would be, if the vast majority of the golf course is designated as conservation recreation, if it was left that way, no one could at any time apply to change that. Is that not correct? And for the next 30 years, is that not correct?
No. The regional growth strategy is sort of an overarching plan, but it's not cast in stone. Nothing's cast in stone. A property owner has a legal right to apply to rezone their property, to change the official community plan designation of the property, and through the city apply to Metro Vancouver to change the regional plan. So nothing is locked in place. There's always that potential for applying for a land use change.
Even if it's designated as conservation recreation?
Yep, as anything.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. McIntyre, one other thing. Cannot Metro Vancouver apply to make a change?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
That's the crux.
Because the RGS, the regional plan, is Metro Vancouver's plan, they're the ones that own it. Just the same way the City of Coquitlam is responsible and is the custodian, if you will, of our official community plan, our zoning. The RGS is Metro Vancouver. So they're the ones that make the changes. We can request or they can initiate on their own.
Yeah, so it's a very sharp two-edged sword. Next speaker, please, before Ms. Moss comes back. Okay, Maggie Moss. Welcome again.
You need my name and address again?
No, I know where you live now.
I guess I'd be very interested to hear, if possible, from Christine Namarco about that last comment that was made about whether Metro Vancouver can actually change things at the golf course. I don't know if she would be able to address how Metro Vancouver could do that.
I think you can ask her that after if you want. Tonight is from our
Well, I
residents.
just think it would be worthwhile for the people who live by the golf course to understand that, if Metro Vancouver can step in and change designations.
Well, they can apply just the same as we all can.
Yeah. This is my other comment, and it's not to do with the the golf course or the green spaces, but I went to Port Moody council meeting a couple of weeks ago while they were discussing whether they were going to accept the RGS. And it was quite interesting to hear their comments about Coquitlam, because they feel very strongly that, in fact, one of them wanted to close off the Barnett Highway to the east, because they've apparently stopped their growth now, yet they have no infrastructure, sort of transportation infrastructure money, yet they're watching Coquitlam, who's going to pile thousands and thousands of people in, yet there's no sort of transportation coming through. And I just wonder why we're being so rapid with our development when we have nothing at the moment. Like, we have 24,000 people going up into Burke Mountain, and this comes from the Port Moody crew, 9,000 people going into Austin Heights, a 35-story building going up in Coquitlam Center, but we're all using that St. John's or Barnett Highway going through Port Moody. And I guess they want to know is why we and Port Coquitlam can't slow our growth until everything is sort of in place.
Probably the same reason Abbotsford, Mission, Maple Ridge, Pitt Meadows. Maybe we should all put gates at our borders. That would make a lot of sense.
But wouldn't it be great if Coquitlam could stand up to the plate and say, we're going to take some action here. Let's slow things down a little bit until we've got all this stuff, evergreen, everything, at least the funding there and the stuff started. Because I guess evergreen's going to take, 4 years to build?
I have no idea. I haven't seen the shovel in the ground yet.
Well, that's right. And I think that's Port Moody's real concern, that they're having to put up with all of this traffic coming through.
Well, I can't comment on another city council.
Well,
they do business the way they feel is right. We do
but I
business
just
the way
wanted to
we
put
feel
that
is
out
right.
there, because certainly I myself moved here 5 years ago, 6 years ago now. And I remember when I first moved here, I went up to Burke Mountain. Oh my goodness, it was beautiful. And within about 3 or 4 months of me coming here, 20,000 trees were downed. And things started to really change very rapidly. But I guess that was just my comment, that it would be nice if things could just slow down a little bit.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone here that would like to speak? Any more resident information? Yes, sir. Oh, we have two. Welcome.
Thank you. Elaine Willis, 2189 Summerwood Lane, Anmore. I've lived in this region for over 30 years, and I've seen the changes, 22 years in Coquitlam. I can echo what many of the people said. I moved here for the beauty, for the trees, and have great concerns about the region as a whole. And it is a whole region, and I appreciate some of the history that was shared by a former mayor. I attended the Anmore Council meeting yesterday where the regional growth strategy was discussed, and it was discussed for a very, very short period. And what the planner shared with us was that the most significant change to the regional growth strategy since the previous version that was considered, pertains to an amendment to the RGS, and it says a number of municipalities had raised concerns about the cumbersome and complex procedure to amend the RGS. It now outlines a number of different procedural requirements dependent upon the type of proposed amendment. Essentially, the more regionally significant a proposed amendment would be, the more involvement the regional board will have. And I suppose, thinking that we were insignificant, this just passed easily in Anmore, and I guess this being a more significant region, the concerns that are being raised here are more alarming to the residents, and I concur. I'm wondering if staff can share why it might be that what it means by regionally significant and how that affects bigger municipalities differently.
I don't believe it affects municipalities in a different way, but if you want to take a quick answer at that, or is that too large a question to go into, Mr. McIntyre?
No, thank you, Madam Chair. It's a difficult one because you won't find a statement in the regional plan defining what regional significance is. It's there. I guess it's sort of woven through the goals and strategies, and it really comes into being in the policies. And so it's then how those policies apply, both primarily as the designations on the maps, but some of the policy statements as well. And then the degree of regional significance is around how easy is it to make those changes. And I think it was pointed out earlier, certain land use changes have a higher level, a higher bar, and more involvement, more oversight by the regional board. Smaller, more minor changes, I guess we're deemed to have lesser regional significance, have a lower bar and less degree of control, I guess, by the Metro board. So it is kind of complicated. There's not a sort of a clear statement of principles in there, but it's implicit in the designations and the means to amend those designations.
Did that help or not?
Just a bit. So could I just ask one question for clarification? So are you saying perhaps that regionally significant isn't defined enough? Or clearly, perhaps?
I think I'm making a statement of fact. You won't find a specific, clear definition of regional significance in the regional growth strategy. What you'll see is it's sort of embodied in the goals and objectives in the policy statements and the land use designations.
Okay, that helps some. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there was someone else from over here. Come forward, please. Name and address for the record.
Chris Heel, 3261 Chartwell Green, Coquitlam. I'm unprepared, and I beg your pardon for that. I didn't quite know what to expect when I came here. I felt moved by the statements of some of the residents that have spoken today. I too live on the golf course up there. I've lived there for 5 years, and it's a very beautiful place.
It is.
I'm kind of disappointed about the turnout tonight. I was expecting more. My neighbor would normally come to these things, but he says he's admitted defeat. He doesn't think that it's worthwhile coming anymore, which is a shame. I did have a message to pass on to Mayor Stewart from my 10-year-old daughter, a former student of his wife. She wanted to remind him that there's lots of animals that live on the plateau. Deer, magnificent deer, raccoons, bears, rabbits, coyotes, and she wants to see this place protected as much as anyone, and as does my 7-year-old son too. So I had one question. I don't know the technicalities that everyone else seems to know about the RGS. I have been to some of these events. I have been to some of the meetings at the Plateau Golf Course, and Councillor Socorro was there too. I had a question for Mr. McIntyre. I appreciate there's three layers of protection coming from what would be the RGS to the community, and then also the bylaw or the covenant. Sorry?
The zoning bylaw.
Zoning bylaw, and then also a covenant as well. And just changing this one regional growth strategy to urban development, that's fine because we've still got the other layers of protection. My only comment is I would prefer to have that third layer of protection still in there. It means, I agree it's very difficult to change if you've still got the two layers and plus the covenant, but it'd be even better if you had three layers of protection. And with Metro Van being able to apply for a change, as for Councillor Reid's comment there, they would still have the three layers of protection that have to get through as well. So me, as a resident, as a father, as someone that enjoys the green spaces around Coquitlam, admittedly, I'm selfish. I'm looking at the Westwood Plateau, but I'd enjoy the other parts as well. If I knew more and I was as learned as these people, I would probably be speaking up and much more vocal about those. But I'd say I'd like to have that third layer of protection in there, and knowing that Coquitlam requested that this be put into the urban development category still is very difficult to swallow and understand where the motivation comes from.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there another speaker, please? Is there any further speakers? Okay, there's no one else, so come ahead, Helen. We'll get your little machine working here. Go ahead.
A little machine? What little machine?
A little timer.
I think there needs to be some clarification regarding the levels of protection and everything. And this gentleman who just spoke, has expressed his desire to have that extra or third layer of protection for the golf course. But I just want to point out that if that 6.3.4 Part B continues to contain that phrase, conservation recreation lands utilized only for commercial extensive recreation facilities, then even if the golf course is put in conservation recreation, it will not have the same level of protection as other conservation recreation spaces because of that phrase. And I think it's really important for everybody on council and Mr. McIntyre to make sure that everybody understands that. It's not, if we if we put the parks and everything back into, or out of green and into conservation rec, yes, they would have the 2/3 vote required to change their land use. But if magically tomorrow the golf courses were put into conservation rec without the removal of that phrase, the golf course, unlike other conservation recreation spaces, would only have a 50% +1 weighted vote at Metro, and no regional public hearing required. So it's quite different. And as I have been referring to this when I've spoken to other people, I have called this, what this phrase does is create a bastard form of conservation recreation. It is not a pure form as other conservation recreation areas are treated. So that has to be clear. That phrase, but maybe Mr. McIntyre might want to explain to us why that phrase went in there, but I think that my opinion is that it was an error in judgment and it should come out.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any further speakers, please? Okay, for the second time. Okay. Name and address for the record, please.
I'm Goche 2578 Burien Drive. I attended a meeting here at Council, I think it was early in the summer. It was in regarding to this Metro Vancouver Regional Growth Strategy Plan, and the removal actually was in regards to a letter which requested that certain lands, green spaces, and the parklands be removed from their RGS land designation from conservation and recreation to general urban. And The reason that many of the members of this council expressed for asking or requesting these changes was that they distrusted Metro Vancouver. I think we really need to work on regaining that trust if we want to work with the other regions in order to protect our green spaces regionally and regional significant areas. It is the mission of the Regional Growth Strategy Plan to further protect these green areas and areas of regional significance, and I think that would benefit all of the community as a whole and our neighboring communities. These are assets for all of our communities. We need to return these lands back to their original designation under the Regional Growth Strategy Plan as conservation and recreation, and work with other members of the Metro Board in order to work together to protect these areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? For the third and last time, are there any further speakers? Are you? Okay, go ahead.
I just have one final question, particularly to Mr. McIntyre. You mentioned that Metro Vancouver, as it is, it's the owner of the Regional Growth Strategy Plan, that it can initiate amendments without the city having to initiate them. Now, what the concern that came up when you mentioned this is what is the effect of Metro Vancouver making its own amendments in terms of Coquitlam's own community plans, and how do them taking the initiative affect us?
Same process, but Mr. McIntyre, go ahead. This is a complicated one, huh?
Yeah, well, the mind boggles because, again, the basic principle is the regional growth strategy, and it's a bylaw. It's a bylaw. It has to go through a process. It's pursuant to legislation, so it's a rigorous legal process. The body having the authority is the regional district, so it's their bylaw, so it's their board, much the same way for the city of Coquitlam. It's city council is the deciding board, so it's the board that makes the decisions about changes to the plan. And because of that, they have that ability to change it. It's their plan. I think practically and realistically, they won't go about making changes to the plan over the objections of the municipality. Mm-hmm. I would think that it would be something that would have to come from the municipality. Because at the end of the day, remember, the Metro Van Board, as was pointed out by Councillor Reid, is composed of council mayors and councillors from across the region. So theoretically, you could have a ridiculous situation where the regional district may try to make changes to the RGS that would fly in the face of what the municipality wants. Realistically, I don't think that's going to happen. They're too busy. They've got too many other matters to deal with. So, but it can set up some interesting processes where there may be ideas for change at the municipal level that have to then go up through. And at the end of the day, it's the Metro Board that makes that decision.
All right. And if the board does hypothetically put through one of these amendments on its own, would that have any legal consequence for Coquitlam's own policies? Or would we be able to keep ours the way they are?
And that's a very interesting question, too, because there is a linkage between the regional plan and our official community plan, which also has a linkage to the zoning. And that is what's called the regional context statement. And so when the regional plan, if one is adopted by the Metro Van Board, each member municipality has 2 years to prepare a regional context statement. And basically, that is the connection, the linkage between our official community plan and the regional plan. Just the same way our zoning is supposed to be consistent with our official community plan. There's supposed to be this alignment going up. I'm sorry, I lost your question.
If an amendment on behalf of Metro Vancouver to regional growth strategy, if that would have any legal implications for our own?
Yeah, thank you. Again, it's speculative, but if the regional plan was to be changed and approved by the board, that was inconsistent with the OCP, you'd set up a conflict between what the OCP may designate something at and what the regional plan would. Really, I wouldn't see that happening. It would be typically more, I think, coming from the community itself in terms of changes, and that would then trigger the need to amend to apply to amend the regional context statement, which has to go to the board, which would then result in the regional growth strategy being changed. So there is a legal linkage because our regional context statement is supposed to be consistent with the regional growth strategy, and our OCP is supposed to be consistent with the regional context statement.
All right, but in terms of an inconsistency, we don't actually know what the procedure would be.
Arbitration.
Yeah, it's. I can't answer on that point. It's.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have Gauthier 2578 Burien Drive. So I want to bring back an old issue. Many of us are here today to express our interest and our benefits of our local green spaces. Coquitlam is one of the few municipalities in Metro Vancouver that does not have a comprehensive tree management bylaw. Our green spaces would benefit from a tree management bylaw that would
Eve, this is tonight is about the regional growth strategy.
Yes, it would benefit both the lands that are in the green spaces, which is public land, as well as the lands that are in the lands that are being developed. So it would protect development lands. It's a further level of protection of our green spaces, which is an important aspect to look at when we're talking about regional growth. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Trumley.
I'll just conclude at 2314 Sumter Drive. I moved here 15 years ago as well, and this gentleman who moved from back east. And one of the reasons I came here was because of the green space. I was raised in a military family, and I've traveled all over the world and moved every 3.5 years to the East Coast, overseas, and so on. And Coquitlam, for the people who have lived here all their lives, may not realize what's going on in the rest of the world. But for the people who have been out there and see what happens when you lose your green space, it's such a jewel here in Coquitlam. And we have to protect that. And I'm hoping through the regional growth plan that City Council becomes activists and their mantra and their raison d'etre, if you wish, is to protect the lands in Coquitlam, because that's the wow factor that Coquitlam's all about. For the people who come here and see this incredible space, an incredible green space, and the mountains and the hills and the animals that you can't simply get anywhere else. And I've seen it around the world. And for the gentleman who's probably been back east, have seen exactly what happens when each little piece is taken out until there's nothing left. So I urge Council, as supporters of Coquitlam, to go back to Metro, if you wish, and be supporters and activists in making sure our spaces are kept green and protected. And I hope that's something for the future we could do. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask one last time if there's anyone that wishes to give us any more public input. If not, thank you for coming. You have been heard, and we are working. And hopefully on March 21st, you will all come and listen to our political debate, which hopefully you will find very interesting. Thank you all, and good evening.